Hey everyone, can you hear us?
Yes.
All right. Welcome to the first workshop of 2021 for RJC. My name is Angel, and I'm here with Kieran.
Kieran, not Karen.
My pronouns are he, him.
My pronouns are she, her.
And we have Sadie with us.
Hey y'all, I apologize, I'm a little under the weather. Sorry for the echo, but I am here. Welcome.
Please bear with us as we work through some technical issues. So we're so grateful everybody is here today for our little workshop. We plan to do these monthly. And in order to do that, we want to build some community and make sure that these workshops are reflecting in the values we have at RJC, which community is probably the most important value, because restorative justice won't work if we're not connected to one another. Emily, could you unmute and introduce yourself as well?
Hi, I'm Emily. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm happy to be here with you all.
So glad you're here, all the way from scenic Virginia. So what we would like to ask of everyone, if you feel comfortable doing so only, if you don't feel comfortable, then don't feel pressured, but if you could just unmute in just a moment. But first, we're going to come up with an icebreaker question. I would just like it if somebody in the audience here, you can just type it in the chat. If you pick a number 1 through 15. Oh,
Lizzie has number 3.
All
Kit
right.
is number 6.
So we already got
2 number 6.
We got 2 6s here. Oh,
7, 9.
Oh. I think we should go with 6 because we got 2.
We got 2, yeah.
Okay. So we're going to ask an icebreaker question. So icebreaker question number 6 is, and I'll say it twice, tell us about someone special in your life. It can be someone in your family, friend group, a peer, or even someone you just know online. Again, tell us someone special in your life. It can be someone in your family, friend group, a peer, or just someone you know online, or even an animal you adore. So I'll start by talking about who do I adore? Well, I adore this one right here, Kieran, next to me, and she's next to me, so that's a lot of social pressure to name her. Kieran?
No pressure, right? Of course I adore D'Angelo, and my dog Carla. She's my she's my world, and I'm her world. So yeah.
I adore Carla too. Emily?
Yeah, so I my old roommate / best friend, she still lives around here, and she's basically the best.
Oh, you're canceled. Nice. You didn't name me. No, just kidding. I think Sadie ran off. Sadie, who do you adore? You can say Raina.
I'm going to shout out somebody on the call who's done really dope work. Angel. Angel has been doing really dope work in the community and educating for a minute. So this is somebody that I admire. I will pass it to Lizzie.
Hi guys. Someone who I adore is my 2 dogs, Jake and Lola, and then my older sister, Rosa.
Oh, and Lizzie, if you don't mind saying your name and pronouns.
Oh, yay. Okay. My name's Lizzie. I use they, she pronouns.
Thank you. And how about, and by the way, if we call on you and you don't feel comfortable, feel free to type or say pass. Lizzie, do you mind calling on anyone randomly in the audience?
I'll pass it to Kit.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kit Emrick. My pronouns are they and or she. I'm feeling energized to be here. And somebody or people that I adore is first and foremost D'Angelo for providing this opportunity, and being able to learn alongside him for 5 months has been just a wild and wonderful ride. And I'm just so wonderfully enthused to charge into more work. So thank you.
Thank you. And Kit, do you mind passing that baton to anyone you feel moved to pass it to?
Has Lizzie gone?
Yes, Lizzie did go.
Has Bo gone yet?
Nope, not yet. Bo, if you don't mind.
Oh, or maybe they stepped away.
All right, not a problem. How about our other angel?
Hi.
Hey!
So I'm Angel, number 2. My pronouns are usually he, him, but sometimes she, her. Emotions I'm feeling in this moment, I guess a little overwhelmed, but also optimistic. And I guess some people I admire, my 2 cats, Twiggy and Luna, for sure. They are my joy, and a good friend of mine who I regularly is a confidant and someone I can collaborate with creatively. So yeah.
And thank you so much, Angel. Thank you, Bo, for answering in the chat. Okay, we're actually sitting in St. Petersburg right now. I think everyone may have gone.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay, that's wonderful. So another thing we like to do here is go over some kind of housekeeping. Don't really like to think of them as rules, more of guidelines. We're pretty rebellious, so rules don't really work for us. We want to make sure everybody feels heard. If at any time you feel like you'd like to speak and you're an introvert like myself and unmuting is intimidating, that's okay. You can just type the word stack, and as soon as we are not in a moment that we're speaking, we will call upon you. If at any time, and we'll go over what the norms look like in just a moment, if at any time you feel like anyone, including us, go against a norm we agree to, just type the word norms in the chat. We prefer that you do that so that way we can address it as a community instead of you feeling the pressure of calling someone out directly. If you have any technical issues, type the word tech and we will pretend like we know how to help you and figure it out. And if you feel that anybody, including any of us, say anything that is problematic, if we reinforce oppression, which we all have been guilty of doing, type the word oops and we will stop what we're doing immediately and we will work to address that. Can't promise we will always say the right things, but one promise we can make at RJC is we will listen. Does everyone feel pretty cool with that? If you can just type yes in the chat or just put a thumbs up react or heart react. Cool, awesome, wonderful. That is great. Okay, and you can use the chat throughout this dialogue to just make comments, hold space for something you're thinking, feeling, that you agree with, that you disagree with. Feel free. Okay, so part of shared spaces is having norms and agreements that we use that help this space feel more at home for everybody, as well as the safest space it could be. There are no 100% safe spaces, so our goal is to make it the safest space that we can. Some of those, so the 2 norms that we have pre-agreed to that we would really like everyone to honor. We go back to the classics, one mic, one diva. Please don't interrupt someone that's speaking. It can feel very invalidating to be interrupted. You may have a good point you're trying to make and you just can't wait to make it. Just use the chat if someone's speaking or type stack and we'll make sure that you are heard after the person is done speaking. We also call in with love and understanding that this is a learning space. So all of us have come at different levels of consciousness. different ideals about what restorative justice means, what abolition means. Some people are somewhere in between that. Some people on Monday, they feel like they've got it, and then on Tuesday, they're confronted with something that challenges those beliefs. And also with anti-oppression work, all of us on this meeting space all have different levels of privilege and marginalizations. We have to be mindful of that. At the same time, this is a designated learning space, so it's not a punitive space. So while we would definitely want anyone called in if there is harm done, we do want to make sure that it's done in a way that signifies love, understanding, and growth, which is sometimes absent in our community spaces. I'd like to take this opportunity, though, A, if we can confirm our consent to these two agreements, and B, if anyone would either like to type in the chat or unmute and give a suggestion for a norm and see if we all agree to that. We'll hold space for that. Sadie, I'd like to elevate what Sadie just said in the chat, assume best intentions. Sometimes intentions still hurt, but at least when we understand we're coming from a decent place, in a place of growth. I would like to elevate Kit too, and I see Sadie is also elevating that, respect pronouns and identity. And if you do mess up, make sure you don't make that mess up about you. Make it about correcting the pronouns and doing better forward. Thank you for elevating that, Kit. All right, it seems like we're good there. You can always jump in at any time if you feel that it's necessary to do so. So I'm going to stop sharing so we can just start looking at our lovely faces. Oh, okay. So thank you everyone for going through that introduction with us. So let's see what we've got on the table next. We did our norms. Okay, so now we're going to do a quick affirmation. This is something that I'm trying to start doing in more spaces. What an affirmation is basically something that I'm going to say out loud 2 times. And you have the option if you would like to say it out loud to yourself on mute, or you can unmute and say it in unison. You can type it in the chat. You can roll your eyes at me and think I'm silly, whatever makes you feel best. I'm going to attempt to say it slowly. I do have a tendency to talk fast, so I apologize in advance. If I am talking too fast at any point, please tell me to slow down. So today's affirmation that I'd like to share is affirmation number 6. For today, in this moment, I affirm that I am not perfect, and that perfection is not a metric that I should even strive for. Today, I am giving myself space to be imperfect, even if just for a moment. I'm going to say it again. Feel free to say it along with me, imperfectly. For today, in this moment, I affirm that I am not perfect, and that perfection is not even a metric I should even strive for. Today, I am giving myself space to be imperfect, even if just for a moment. I just want to kind of sit with that for a second. Anyone else struggle with always feeling like you have to be perfect? Okay.
I know I do.
That's right. So we do want to meditate a little bit. I'm going to come back on the sound in just a second.
All right. before we get started we're going to do some conscious grounding. So what I'd like everybody to do is get in a comfortable position. If you have the ability to do so, you can turn your camera off if you're on camera to get even more comfortable. And we're going to do some breathing exercises to get us ready to sit in this space. So something I do to even further connect with my body is place my hand on my heart or my chest, and that's my right hand, my left hand on my stomach, so that I can really feel the inhalation and exhalation. We're going to do 10 deep breaths. And when you breathe in, I want you to take as much time as you need to. Let your belly expand. You can breathe in through your nose. And then once your belly is out and you have as much air as you can get in there, hold for a moment and then exhale through your mouth. So again, we're going to inhale, hold, and exhale. And as we do this in meditation and grounding, the intention is not to clear our mind of everything. The intention is to acknowledge the thoughts as they pass through, see them, and continue to move forward. So if there's something that's coming up in your mind, acknowledge that thought, let it be, let it sit, and continue to move forward in your breathing and your breaths. So I am going to be silent for the next 30 seconds so that you can finish your breathing, and then we will all return into the space. All right, and with your final inhale and exhalation, I want to welcome you back into the space. Hopefully you are feeling brighter and a bit lighter, and we look forward to sharing space with you all for the next hour or so. But with that, I'll give folks a few more minutes, and if you can come on camera, great. If you don't feel comfortable, that's all right too. But we can jump back into sharing our screen and get into today's workshop.
Thank you so much, Sadie. Thank you, Kieran. All right, I'm hoping everyone's feeling so we're going to go ahead and dive into what we're going to call this section here, restorative justice concepts. And this is where we're going to dive in to some of the concepts surrounding restorative justice and how restorative justice, at least from the way we believe in restorative justice, should disrupt white supremacy, cis heteropatriarchy, misogyny, ableism, etc., as well as the system of what we know as domination logic. So I say that because there are some instances where the term restorative justice is used, but it doesn't necessarily disrupt those things as so much as it aids it. And there's a pretty dramatic difference between those. So this is where we're going to talk about a concept that Emily has been working on. Emily, I can share my screen, or would you prefer you share?
I can share. Let's see. How do I do this?
Raise the volume again. Sorry, Emily, could you say that again?
Oh, yeah, I will share. Let me pull up before I end up sharing like random documents. Okay.
While Emily is getting that ready, we're going to talk about a scenario that we kind of created on the fly. The goal here at Restorative Justice Coalition is not for us to show off how great we are at restorative justice or to be the authority. Sometimes we actually don't know what the answer is. And it comes to a community. So as Emily's going through this, let's listen to things that make us uncomfortable or that we relate to, and feel free to type along or store your thoughts for after the presentation is done or during the interactive parts.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm really hoping this will be like a discussion and hopefully like a fun exercise to think about how we can use restorative justice and what it would look like in practice. So this topic, the first one, so I'll just go through our little intro slides. And so what we're going to be talking about today for this section is how can we practice restorative justice in daily life? So if anyone wants to throw out into the chat like an instance where you could see restorative justice working, we're going to talk about a like at home sibling fight type restorative justice situation, but there are so many other ways that we can use it. So if anyone wants to type in the chat, you know, send some ideas. But yeah. So I am not sure if I can see the chat because I'm in full screen. So if anyone says something, just let me know, Kieran or anyone. Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're going to do this one example that we sort of came up with. So these siblings that we've named Zora and Paul, they've been shouting with each other every night for 2 weeks. It's too much. It's not okay. And Zora says that she drives Paul to school every morning and claims that he keeps making her late for class. So this is just the basic information we have about this. Let's see where this goes. All right. So who would be impacted by this conflict? What are their roles? So just type into the chat, or you could unmute yourself and answer who you think is impacted and what their role as part of this restorative justice process would be.
And Emily, if you don't mind going back one slide so we could just take a look while we're deciding who's who.
Oh, I went back. Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, so we see both people are impacted. Yep. Who else? Is there anyone else who's impacted?
I would say the parents or the caretakers, because anybody that has siblings know that we got on our parents' nerves.
Right, and right as you were saying that, I wanted to elevate that, but put in the chat any other housemates.
Housemates. Yep. Anyone else who's living there? Any other siblings, bystanders, parents, caretakers? Yeah. Okay. So, and then if we want to sort of put them into their different roles in this situation. So Zora is saying that she's been a victim of a harm. Paul, she says, caused the harm. And then the community who is also impacted by this, so they're also involved in the restorative process, is, you know, the family, parents, other siblings, others in the household. Yeah. So what are some actions a community might normally take to address this conflict? You know, let's not think necessarily restorative, but what are some things that like maybe your parents did, or you've seen people do in a type of situation where there were two siblings fighting like this and shouting with each other every night?
Yeah, I could start with one because I have 5 siblings. So I had a lot of that. A lot of being forced to apologize was what my family would do. Like, hey, just apologize and then bury it. And then surprisingly, there'd be a fight the next week. And I want to elevate a comment here from Kit, having alternative people engage and drive them. I like that.
That is good. Yeah. Some that we also talked about. So yeah, domestic police encounters are not restorative. Yeah. So ignoring the conflict, it's not a restorative action in this case. Or let's see, forcing Paul to apologize, like D'Angelo mentioned, not restorative. Grounding them for shouting. Shouting, being the type of person to address conflict by also shouting. Spanking is not restorative. So those are some things that people might normally do. And then you guys also mentioned some other ones. So if we wanted to look at this from a restorative framework, what could be the first thing that we could all do to take that first restorative step? So if anyone wants to unmute themselves or send it in the chat, or
Yeah, let's just give folks a few moments to come up with a answer. Sorry for the echo.
so would this be something, maybe the first step would be some sort of engaging? Okay, having a mediator give each sibling an opportunity to share their perspectives. That was a great way to put that. We called it identification. Yes. Starting a conversation with the victim and the harm causer separately, and having a mediator is a great option for sure. Yeah.
Emily? Does it sound like that for y'all?
Yes. I think it's because Sadie muted.
No, I don't know why I was doing that. But Emily, I just wanted to ask your opinion. Does the mediator necessarily have to be a paid counselor, or who could the mediator be if it was just like a lower middle class or a poor family?
I think there's a lot of options. So if obviously it's good, if you're hiring a mediator, to pay them if you can. But there's also, maybe there's a parent who can be seen by both parties as someone who they can trust and be open with, or maybe a teacher, or an older sibling or something like that. Yeah. What do you think?
Definitely. I mean, it could be a neighbor, it could be grandma, it could be a friend. So I really think those are some great examples. It's just when we think about these things, we do have to expand our imaginations a little bit, because sometimes it can't be, a paid RJ coordinator in every case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So when we're doing that identification stage where someone is engaging with both the harm causer and the victim, we want to pinpoint the reason and not the excuse, and to be compassionate with the reason. So a reason, we're just going to give a little bit of a definition. Reason is why something happened. And then the excuse is the justification for why it happened. So let's say you didn't do your homework, and you're like justifying something to your teacher, like, oh, I didn't do my homework. I just didn't want to. Or yeah, that's your excuse. But your reason is maybe you didn't have enough time because you were at work, or you didn't sleep enough. My dog ate it. Yeah. So the reason is the root cause, why something actually happened. And then the excuse is what might someone identify as why they did it. Group therapy or counseling. Those are always good ideas. Yeah. Okay. So when you're talking to Zora and Paul, trying in the identification of their issue, sorry, just look at the chat. All right, so you learn that Paul always makes Zora stop at a drive-through to pick up breakfast for him. And Paul tells you that he's always still hungry after the breakfast he eats at home. So what is the reason, I guess, that Zora is always late to school when she drives Paul? And you can type in the chat. You can feel free to unmute yourself and speak.
Well, Paul's still hungry and he wants food, and Zora's being the sibling and taking him to get the breakfast. So
Yeah.
that takes time out of the day.
Yep. Especially when it's early in the morning and you got to go to school. You're like, makes it worse. But yeah, so he's hungry. That's why they're stopping at the drive-thru. That's why that's making them late to go to school. So what is the restorative next step?
Canceling and blocking both. No, just kidding.
And then when we're thinking about the restorative next step, as we're going to be discussing this in a minute, we want to think about punishment versus consequence. So in a restorative justice type situation, we're not trying to punish. We're not saying you deserve this. We're saying there is like a healing versus punishment. We want to heal, we want to help rather than punish. So we want to define punishment as something that someone decides that you deserve for a harm that you caused. So that's not a restorative thing, but sometimes there are consequences to our actions that are negative. And so it's a consequence is a natural result, a logically cause and effect, an outcome that you consented to before. So same with not turning in your homework, the punishment, oh, you get kicked out of class for the day, you have to go, you're suspended. That's a very high punishment for not doing your homework. Let's say you're suspended, but a consequence could be you don't do well on the test because you didn't practice. So yeah, so when we're looking at the next step, what is the next step? Let's think about stepping away from punishment and thinking more about how can we heal?
Emily, do you mind if I chime in one quick sec?
Yeah.
I was just thinking when you were talking about punishment versus consequence about homework, I was thinking about in 7th grade, I had a teacher who would make us write lines whenever we didn't do an assignment or we acted up. And I remember one time it was a science class. I remember doing a science assignment. Yeah, oh my goodness. I remember doing a science class and I only did my assignment, which I half-assed it because I didn't want to write lines. And reflecting back to it, it's like, how could I have been motivated with my own self-determination to do that assignment and actually retain the information versus now where the only thing I remember out of it is that feeling of not wanting to sit there and write lines. So a lot of times I think punishment, no matter how well-intended it is, winds up warping our mindset about whatever quote behavior we're being punished about. So now we only think about avoiding the punishment rather than reaping the rewards of quote positive behavior, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in this case, we don't want to punish Paul or Zora for shouting, right? We want them to stop shouting and we want them to be able to get to school on time. And we want Paul to not go to school hungry. So we have all these goals that we can meet without punishing anyone. Just like D'Angelo was saying, like the goal of doing his homework and remembering what he learned could have been done differently if it wasn't made a punishment. So does anyone have any suggestions of what the next step could be or a way to address the problem in a restorative way that doesn't focus on punishment?
One thing that I'm thinking about is maybe a restorative next step would be to, if there is a way to provide the adequate breakfast before, so that kind of like avoids the conflict that is brought about by Zora being late because Paul needed to stop for breakfast, if that all made sense.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's like that is like the root cause of this whole issue is Paul doesn't have enough breakfast in the morning. So maybe whoever is preparing his breakfast or buying the food for breakfast could talk to him before they go to the grocery store the next time, or could ask him the night before, what do you want to eat for breakfast? Or could say, here, how about you make your own breakfast, and then you can decide what is enough for you. Yes, meet needs. Yes. Yeah. Are there any thoughts or questions that anyone wants to ask? Yes, Bo?
This might be a better question for later, but my thought is in how we can decrease costs associated with being able to, I guess, access restorative justice. Because the first thing I picked up on was that although you don't need one, there's a payment required for restorative justice mediators. And there might be issues for people being able to afford the proper nutrition. So I feel like a lot of these issues could come down to race, class, disability, etc. How do we eliminate those costs to have more people be able to equitably access and get favorable results from this process?
Yeah, those are some very serious questions. You're right. So in terms of the mediator thing, you don't have to pay a mediator. You don't just, I just want to make sure it's clear. You don't have to pay a mediator. You don't have to get a mediator. People can definitely do this themselves. But it's always good if you're asking someone to do labor to, compensate them in a way that they agree is acceptable. But yeah, those are definitely some big questions that we're gonna try to touch on. Does anyone want to answer those questions right now, or do we want to move on? And I can, I see Lizzie sent a message.
I'm happy to kind of go into those conversations. So and Lizzie, I'll definitely make sure we touch on that question because that's a really good one. But about the question about cost, so obviously with restorative justice, when we look at it holistically, we look at the whole fact that there are so many systemic issues and barriers. Even with this workshop, like, we're providing labor and all that, and we want to make sure we're compensated in a way to keep our organization going. We have the different tiers to allow folks in, and we appreciate folks who were able to pay the full tier, understanding that not everybody can. So we're always trying to think constantly of how do we create a space that is accessible while also realizing that we can't sustain ourselves if we aren't providing mediators with pay. So this is where the idea of restorative justice really requiring collectivism comes into play. So if we had the society we dream of, you would actually be able to call like a neighbor or a cousin and say, hey, we're having this issue. And that person would just be RJ trained. RJ would be something we're taught as little as kindergarten if we had it our way. But obviously we don't have it our way. So part of this is we're hoping those of you who take these types of workshops will expand your education on it and teach your neighbors, teach your children, teach your aunt and uncle. It's all going to require a collective effort. To the question about what happens if the harm causer doesn't want to engage in restorative justice. That happens all the time. And it's not even just the harm causer. What if the person harmed doesn't want to partake? Do we just call the police and let the criminal justice system do it? Do we just give up? It's not easy when you run into those situations. And I think Kit could attest to a situation, we're not obviously going to go into confidential details, but a situation where we had folks that didn't want to engage in a process. What we do is we get creative. We have to come up with different ways to work through the problems. Because it's not restorative justice if it doesn't involve consent. And it's not consent if we coerce someone and say, well, if you don't do this process, then we're going to throw you in jail. That's coercion. So I wish I had a more like hard answer for that, like a more solid answer. Kit wrote in there that they have specialized in holding processes even if people refuse. I feel like RJC has sort of quasi-specialized into that. So if anyone else wants to chime into those thoughts, because I think those are great questions. If anyone else wants to chime in, feel free. All right. Emily, was that the presentation? All right. Awesome. Awesome. That was really great, Emily. I really appreciated that. And I'm sure everyone knows we're not going to solve all the world's problems today, although I wish we could. So one thing we're going to talk about now here is a concept about restorative justice in society in real time. When we think about a lot of the harms that happen in our society, a lot of times the impulse is to respond, like we critique very deservingly so, we critique either how the police or the school or the prison system responded to a situation. And that's important. But the reality is part of restorative justice holistically is thinking, how do we prevent the harms from happening in the first place? So that way we don't have to worry about how this armed militia is responding to things. Dr. Angela Davis really said it best when she said that, you know, abolition is less about the dismantling of, the destruction of, and more about building a society anew, so much so that the very idea of calling an armed militia to solve your problems or using a concrete box to store someone seems so unnecessary because society doesn't look that way. Another thing that's important is we're not trying to build a society without harm. That's utopia, and utopia doesn't, you know, that doesn't exist. Instead, we're trying to build a society where collectivism heals harm together. So the old saying, it takes a village. Well, we learned, I think one of the best lessons, but one of the hardest lessons last year for me was it takes a village to heal someone who's been harmed. It equally takes a village to help someone hold themselves accountable for causing harm. So I was reading an article in the neighborhood on Google about burglaries increasing in Clearwater, which is, for those who are not local, is a neighboring city to St. Pete, I would say.
Yeah.
And as I was reading it, I was thinking about holistically, you know, they're talking about obviously the bottom. If you know any information about these people breaking into cars, call Clearwater Police Department. I was like, well, we've been calling Clearwater Police for the burglary issues for decades, and they still seem to happen. So what if we thought about it more holistically? No, I don't have a way to know for sure why these people are breaking into cars. I can only use conjecture. But one thing I have learned for sure is most people don't wake up in the morning and say, you know, it would be a great way to fill the day, busting into cars and stealing from them. Most people don't wake up in the morning and think that. Most of the time it is what needs are not being met by the community. You know, what is the community not doing to meet needs so where people are feeling this need? And I thought about like how desperation forms from poverty. It's possible the person breaking into the cars is not struggling through poverty. It's possible that they're just doing it for some other reason. It's possible that they could have an addiction to alcohol or drugs, which may cause them to run out of money quicker and need to meet that need. I've then thought back when I was reading about how my car got not even broken into. I carelessly left the door unlocked in my neighborhood. And during COVID, I only go out to my car maybe once a week now. So it had probably been a whole week before I noticed. I saw all my paperwork had been gone through. I don't know if anything was taken because my car is a mess. So it could have had anything from $1 million in it to just a stick of gum that could have been taken. And I remember feeling violated because it's like my personal space and all that. And then I started to feel angry, but I wasn't really angry at the person that did it. They accidentally left behind their social security paperwork, by the way. So I absolutely know who it was. Yeah. I wasn't so much angry at them as I started to become angry at a society that makes that a need. And I happened to find through the information, they didn't have an address listed on the social security information, like a home address. They had an address that looked like it was to a business. And when I looked it up, it was DACO. For those who aren't local, DACO is a drug clinic. So it's a clinic that, I call it an assembly line. You go in, you get a bit of treatment, you go out, you come back, you go in, you get a little bit of treatment, you go out, they build an insurance company, they build a state, and it's a cycle of what I call the substance abuse industrial complex. And I just started getting angry that this person felt so desperate that they had to go through my car hoping to find change. They probably did take change, hoping to find something so that way they could sustain themselves, both living on the streets of Hillsborough County, which if you haven't been here, you know that that's a dangerous place to be. And while of course I don't know this person's story, I'm imagining a world where what would it have looked like if she could have just knocked on my door in the middle of the night, if we weren't so afraid of each other, taught to be so afraid, and said, I'm struggling, like, do you have something I can eat? Do you have $5? Instead of having to go through my car and violating that space. And I also thought about the privilege I have to have a car to be violated, where she, from my imagination, again, I don't know her, but my imagination is she's probably somebody that has to walk everywhere. And as you know, if you're in Hillsborough County, transportation sucks. So I put all that together, and I remember thinking too, that if this had happened to me 5 years ago, I would have just been angry at her. I wouldn't have looked at it systemically. So that was something I saw in the news I wanted to bring up. If anybody else from RJC wants to talk about a real life situation.
Well, I'll just kind of mention how unfortunately common that is, because a few months ago, or maybe it was like over the summer, I guess some teenagers were going down my neighborhood street, and they were doing the same thing. But they weren't breaking into cars. They were just checking to see like somebody that left their car door unlocked, which I do a lot too. And my car, well, you know, my car, I don't know what they would have stole out of there, but but anyway, but my neighbor's car was gotten into, and one of them made off with my neighbor's purse that had some like old personal pictures in there. They never retrieved the purse, but they did. Apparently, it was like 2 or 3 teenagers that were doing it, and the one that they caught just turned 18.
No.
And my neighbors, because you know the cop lights were out there and all lit up, and you know my neighbors were upset. And like you said, if it was me a few years ago, I would have been just like my neighbors, because my neighbors were very upset about what happened, and they were very upset at the person, rather than, like you said, having the perspective of like, okay, what is it about society that drove this person to feel like they had to do that? So that's why I think something like this can be helpful, because it's a way of changing your perspective. But yeah, I remember my neighbors were very, very, very upset about that. You want to take that one?
Oh, I see in the chat from Bo, thank you. How do we incentivize local communities, and for most people here, Tampa Bay communities, to invest in restorative justice instead of the traditional carceral systems? Both theoretical and concrete actions, because they're still increasing police budgets. And then Sadie, even the shift in punitive impact with the recent birthday. Oh my goodness, yes, that like breaks my heart.
That's the first thing that came to my mind, is they had just turned 18. I was like, oh, yeah.
So to Bo's point there, I think that, I mean, I'm at a point now where I agree that it's going to have to be localized communities that are invested in these mindsets than localized government, because we saw what happened with the refund the community work, where they went and not only did they increase the police budget last year in Tampa, which call your city council members every day and be pissed about it. But they not only increased the police budget at the budget season, they have since continued to do it. And every time we approach them, it's like, oh, well, we have no other choice. And it's like, what do you mean you have no choice? Meanwhile, Vanessa McCleary, who was part of the city of Tampa's housing and development, she was at city council. She was moving on and they were honoring her work. And she basically almost in tears begged the city council to please fund the housing and development program more, because this staff is working on the bare bones, begging and crying. And all these powerful men behind the counter were like, oh, we wish we could have done more to help. This was only months after they gave the Tampa Police Department $13 million, and only a month before they spent $6 million to demolish a warehouse in historically Black East Tampa, so that way they can build a city center that literally nobody in the community wants. So incentivizing, I think Bo's point about saying local communities instead of local governments is where we need to begin.
And how to do that is part of the journey and trying to figure out exactly those kinds of questions.
I wanted to add to that by saying normalizing RJ in our lives. So just like the process that Emily was going through with us, normalizing that in our behavior and communication with folks, we'll start to make it like a normalized conversation, and people are like, oh, okay, may not necessarily attach the name restorative to it, but I find that this continues the practice and people continue like embodying it in their personal life. But outside of just like what Kieran and Dee said, outside of that, I'm going to go back politically, voting folks out and increased advocacy work in any space that you can find, especially on a municipal level too. I love that kid. I wanted to mention really quick before we jump into something else, something, and Kit, you just reminded me of this, something that RJC has done in the past is work here in Pinellas County with programs that are implementing RJ into the school system. So rather than going into a punitive route, they're holding like RJ spaces and healing circles for children. There's a lot of studies that I can like send to y'all on what that looks like in a long-term sense, but it is absolutely amazing. And just like you're saying, have staff trained in RJ, it starts with our youth and it starts in the education system. So just continuing to push that to our, not just like the legislators, but our, what are they called? County school board representatives as well, making sure that we have those folks in. But yeah, that just reminded me, and the kids grasp this and they are brilliant, and it's just really amazing. So that was like a long talk about nothing, but yeah, how can RJ be implemented into high schools? Do you want to take that? All right.
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to find the unmute button. Yeah, I think to Sadie's point, first of all, the youth are not so indoctrinated in this punitive system that I was pleasantly surprised when we did a workshop here in Pinellas County at I think it was a church. These folks, it was a range of actually middle school to high school. They came up with solutions that I was just like blown away by. I was like, oh, wow, like you thought about like something that like I'm so indoctrinated to believe couldn't happen, and I'm doing this work. So I think it does start with getting folks at the youth age invested in RJ and looking, instead of the school to prison pipeline, we could have the school to healing pipeline. Because we think about it too, we do put a lot of pressure on our educators to solve the problems in the community, and they can't do that, especially even if they were paid $100,000 a year, they couldn't do that because you can't put the weight of a systemic issue on any specific person. And I thought about like, if we had school systems that were set up for more healing, we can't control what's happening at home. Like my educators could not control what was going on in my home. They couldn't control that I lived in a single parent home with an addicted parent in poverty. They can't control that, but they could control what different services could have been available to me in the school. And the only services I got was I'm absent all the time. Instead of anyone asking, D'Angelo, why don't you come to school? The answer was I was unhappy at home and I was bullied at school. You know, being gay wasn't really in fashion in Hillsborough High School in early 2000s. So it's like I didn't feel safe anywhere. So I would skip school, not to stay at home where I didn't feel safe, but I would literally do things so benign, such as ride the city bus all day. Because at least for 8 hours, I was alone and I was safe. Imagine what my trajectory could have looked like, and I feel others may relate to this, but what could my trajectory have looked like if perhaps someone actually sat with me and said, D'Angelo, why aren't you coming to school? What is going on? Why aren't you feeling safe here? What could it have looked like if there were healing circles for the youth? What could it have looked like if there was what I've been seeing in a lot of RJ spaces, and I don't like the term jury because I want us to move away from using language that exists in the system. So I've been calling them panels, but they have peer panels in high school level and even middle school level, where if you F up, so to speak, like let's say you're the bully, Kieran, and you're bullying me, and Sadie is also, we're all high schoolers in this, and Sadie is the mediator. And Emily is the other mediator, and we're having our identification separately. And we find out that Kieran is feeling bullied at home and comes and takes that to school. Because someone said, and I think it may have been Adrienne Marie Brown, said, the first time someone interacts with harm is rarely the time that they're giving harm to someone else. Most likely, someone who caused harm has been through cycles of receiving harm. And that's not an excuse. That goes back to what Emily said, a reason versus an excuse. But a lot of times I think we don't feel like we can give that empathy to our harm causers and say, hey, you caused me harm, so therefore I don't care about the fact that you've ever been a victim. And I will say, as individuals, the individual who was harmed, it's not your necessary responsibility to take the weight of your harm causer's pain. That's not your job. But there has to be a structure where that exists. Somebody has to do that work. Otherwise, the harm just repeats. So how do we get it into high schools? We have to do the same, like we have to do the opposite of what the structures are doing now. And we have to imagine and believe that this can exist and start getting it into the minds of schools. To that point there, how can we help RJC spread restorative justice to local schools? I think that's something we're going to start thinking about more throughout the year and try to come up with a plan. One thing though that kind of was in motion and the work kind of fell off was getting rid of police out of the school system. We really need people to take up that. Like it needs to be regular every day, go to the PTA people that are saying like, we don't want police in schools. Unfortunately, the state of Florida requires it by Florida law, as we learned. I think it was either last year that we learned that. Yeah. So how do we get the police out of schools? And in the meantime, while we're stuck with them by law, how do we start implementing RJ counselors into the schools now? I hate to say RJ and policing coexisting because they should never coexist. But with the way the state is set up, that may have to be the direction we go. Did you want to talk on that?
Sure. And I'm sharing a link because I just found this is a different one than what I was looking for. But this is a local story about restorative justice being pushed for by a parent group. So this is something that is being discussed. If you click on the link, whenever you do, you'll see that story is actually from 2019, so about 2 years ago. So it is something that's new and it is being discussed. And of course, something that's new and something so different can and will take time to get traction and get caught on, but it's people like this, for example, it's these parents that are pushing for restorative justice type of practices in schools. There was another one that I read about in Tampa, but I'm not finding that one for some reason. But let me see if I can find it real quick. But yeah, like I said, that's something that your question is, how do we get it in schools? Honestly, just making more people aware of it. And also like this one, it's a parent group that they've become aware of the concept and now they are trying to implement it into their children's school. Yes, go ahead, Sadie.
I know I'm aggressively chewing. I'm so sorry. But something that I wanted to lift in alignment with this, there is a school in DC called the Ron Brown High School, and it is a school specifically for BIPOC children, primarily Black youth, who are, I think it's just folks that identify as male that they are accepting into the school. And I think the reason is because the number of like arrests and crimes in that area, they want to make sure that they create a school with a restorative method approach. And there's a really dope NPR podcast. If you're like me, I'm like, I know this information I got from a podcast, you know, not that podcast or fact, but it's really dope. It's a show called Code Switch, which talks about like implications of race in like normal life, right? So definitely encourage you all to take a listen to that. It's very interesting. It talks about how the school is established, on what principles, and how restorative justice has actually functioned. over the past few years, and proudly Color Change, the organization that I work with, we have programming working directly with the youth there. That is really amazing, and those young men are just so dope. So that was like just another ad if you want to learn more about that though too.
Thank you so much, Sadie, for elevating that and these resources. It's definitely, and one thing I just want to make clear too, and Sadie brought it up in this point is, and this is something that I think disturbs all of us at RJC, there needs to be an anti-oppression element to any RJ program that comes into place. And we're seeing a lot of co-option where there's RJ processes that don't address systemic oppression. And I think in our experience last year with an RJ process, we saw a situation where the power dynamics weren't simple. It wasn't as easy as this person has power over this person. It was actually very complicated. And I think that like in our instant gratification kind of minds and the way the system even operates, where you have a clear cut, this person is charged with the crime, this person is the victim who's not even in the equation in the criminal justice system. It's going to be the state of Florida versus the harm causer. Not your name's not even in it if you're a victim. And I know that personally from having to go through the criminal justice system as a surviving family member of something as serious as homicide. And it was state of Florida versus the person who committed the harm. The name of my deceased relative wasn't even in the case. Their name was only mentioned, I think, 3 times in the trial. So when we think about systems of oppression and how they operate, I never want to give the impression that a person who's a marginalized status can't harm a person of a privileged status, of course. But we have to take into account those oppressions when we do this work. So I, as a gay man, could absolutely harm a straight man. But one example I had to give last year was those of us that are gay, lesbian, queer, trans, bi, anything off the hetero spectrum. I've talked about sex as benignly as my cis hetero peers would talk about it. And I have been accused of being sexually inappropriate because of it, whereas someone just moments before who is talking about it in a cis hetero relationship was not done that. So it's like, it's okay if conversations around sex make you uncomfortable, but that was a mix of a power dynamic where it's like, what if another straight person was mediating that situation and they didn't have the anti-oppression training that they needed? It could have looked like, oh, well, here goes another homo, like, engaging the, harassing the straights. And I'm not into straights. So trust me, I wasn't going after that person. Let's take a look here. I'm going to take a look at something here. And if folks want to chime in, definitely feel free.
Kit, that sounds amazing. Would you happen to have a link to share with everyone on that chart? Release it after the meeting?
Learned about it through an Afrofuturism kind of lens, but the way that it was described.
All right. So I think we covered a lot for our first workshop. Eventually, we're going to want to start doing things like group activities and things like that. Hopefully get some more folks in here. I think we can start kind of doing wrap up here. I want to make sure that we have space for conversation and dialogue. We do have till 1:30. But before we go into that, I just wanted to plug our book club. We have a few folks, and I want to thank Emily and Kieran for spearheading this. We started with We Do This Till We Free Us, which actually wasn't originally the first book we had intended to do. But I'm grateful that Emily questioned and was inquisitive and said maybe we should start somewhere else. And Mariam Kaba happens to be an abolitionist that I study, very, very closely. I'm obsessed with this book, and I'm not like, I don't read like regularly, but I'm out on my porch reading this book. So if you want to join our book club, we can get you a link to sign up. If you're a person of color, it's totally free. If you're not a person of color, but you're at an economic point where you can't afford, okay, we'll get you in. Basically, if you can't afford the book, we'll find a way. We've learned that there's a way. So we have someone down here, Lizzie, that says they would like to join. How can we get organizations together around restorative justice if we need to rely on communities and not government? And are there inroads to Pinellas and Hills Road to making things better? Thank you, Emily, for sending the chat. And thank you, Angel, for highlighting that it's on sale from the publisher. I think that's a really good question, Bo. Like, I guess it goes back to this saying I heard a while ago, like, you can't heal in the same place that made you sick. And I think like the system is what's making us all sick, some more than others, depending on where our identity points are in society. But it's really toxic to all of us. And I don't know that it can ever deliver an alternative that's actually going to be holistic and true. It may look better or be better than, but when we look at the like how the system has transformed over the years from the chattel slavery oppression to Jim Crow, arguably you could say, oh, well, there was progress throughout these lines, but at the end of the day, it still winds up being oppression. So it's just like neatly packaged oppression with a different name and a different look. So what we have to do, in my opinion, and this is something we're gonna have to work on together, is we have to have more discussions like this, more book clubs like this, more educational videos like this, zines, mutual aid events, which I wanna shout out our friend Erdeja is doing a mutual aid event on April 18th in historic East Tampa, which is a very intentionally underserved Black neighborhood. We have to start bringing it out to the people. Another thing that Sadie and I have talked about is the more we get into the youth and we talk about these things, we're going to grow adults who are going to take over this world. And when we pass that baton to them, we're going to see a world that we could not have imagined, hopefully, when we're in our elder years, and be so proud of the world we built. Another last thing I want to bring up, I talk a lot about mutual aid societies because I'm obsessed with Tampa's history, especially Ybor, which was built by Black Cubans, Spanish Cubans, newly freed Black folks who were freed from chattel slavery, as well as Sicilian immigrants that built mutual aid societies back when they were all considered the dejected people of the United States. They built their own city, which we now know as Ybor, and they just took care of each other in ways that are unfathomable to me in this society. And then I realized the other day, I was like, we're not building a society that we're imagining. We're trying to rebuild societies that were stolen. And that goes back to Indigenous United States, sorry, I shouldn't say that, Indigenous Americas, as well as what life was like in Indigenous Africa and Indigenous Australia, and even parts of Indigenous Asia, from my understanding, I'm still kind of learning, always had societies that were collective and built this way. And then those societies were stolen, colonized, destroyed. So we're not actually trying to create something new. We're actually trying to rebuild what was stolen, just with cell phones and laptops. Oh, thank you. Yeah, we'll definitely reach out to you, if not today, sometime during the week. That's awesome. Anybody else kind of want to chime in some thoughts about RJ or anything we've talked about, even if it's disagreements or discomforts? Thank you. Oh, I used to go to Eckerd. Why can't I copy it? Kit, once we get to the point where we can fly you down here, you are going to get a tour of your life. Emily's going to come too. She doesn't know it yet.
No, I have to come.
It'll save a transcript for me.
Okay.
I have a quick question. Would anyone, so it wouldn't be until next fall when I'm teaching again, but would anyone from RJC be willing to come into my class to talk? In my class, I teach James Baldwin's short story, Sonny's Blues, and one of the main characters, Sonny, is a drug addict who is incarcerated. And I think that could be a really cool story to bring in a restorative justice perspective. So just throwing it out there while it's on my mind. It won't be until next fall, but
I know I'm interested.
That
for
sounds
sure.
amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
Angel, what level do you teach? Is it college or below?
college. Yeah.
College. Perfect. I didn't know that.
Cool. Awesome.
It's really good to see you again, Angel, by the way.
Oh, thanks. Likewise. It's good to see you. A really long time.
All right, we're going to start wrapping up here, but I do want to elevate this question. Any concrete steps that we suggest for the future We are fighting HB1. Sadie actually got an opportunity to be in a meeting with, was it Learned or Miss Driscoll?
I think it was, oh no, not I think it was Learned and Driscoll. That first meeting was abysmal, but it is on the floor now. House Bill 1 is on the floor. I think it had a update around.
It did pass the House on Friday, so now the HB1 targeting is going to be specifically senators.
So go ahead, Dee.
No, I was just elevating that.
That's okay. So it was projected to pass in the House, and we knew that it was going to go to committees and that to happen. But there is a smaller chance that it will pass through the Senate. I think it's like 3 or 4 Republican conservative folks move in defect or whatever will be able to stop it in the Senate, and that work is possible once we have more information. Folks we're in coalition with about how we'll move towards that. We will definitely release that information. So yeah, it's scary, but it's stoppable.
And I wanted to elevate because I just realized there are folks that are not in Florida here. So HB1 is a very problematic anti-protest bill that was built specifically to suppress Black voices because of the uprisings that occurred last year. Florida actually really turned out last year for these uprisings. And I don't think they've ever been as scared as they've ever been in that movement since probably the original civil rights movement of the 50s that they pretend was nonviolent in Tampa because it just was, Tampa's PR is amazing. But for the Senate aspect, I know Kieran here has been among them, but a group known as Dream Defenders has also taken a really strong community-centric approach to this bill. And there's been phone banking going on. Was it weekly?
Every Tuesday and Thursday. There's 2 sessions, I think, is 3 to 5. And then 6 to 8, you can volunteer. So Tuesdays and Thursdays, it's going to be every Tuesday and Thursday until this session's over, to phone bank. And the phone bank is basically reaching out to folks who have shown some sort of, you'll more than likely not get an angry person, but of course you never know. So we just, tell them how terrible House Bill 1 is. I always emphasize that for me personally, the most scary part of it is if somebody, uses their vehicle as a weapon, that it basically stands your ground to your vehicle. So they can't press charges. They can't even, like, the person who was hit can't even go after making like a claim to like pay medical bills, like nothing. Like there's zero accountability for doing physical harm to protesters. And also they want to make protesting punishable by felony, and they're creating a new aggravated rioting, which would be an automatic 3rd-degree felony. So they're creating things that are, there's already anti-rioting laws in place. So it's really terrible for First Amendment rights. And yeah, so Dream Defenders, like I said, if you're interested in volunteering for phone banking, that's been on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you can sign up from anywhere. Of course, it's a phone banking where you're using a system, so your phone number doesn't show up. Actually, funny enough, I think the ID shows it as the Florida governor calling.
It does.
It does. Yeah, it's all right, because you got a phone call. So, we're just telling people, hey, this is what is going on, and then we can patch them through to their representative, which at this point is going to be their senator rather than the House person. And then also on Saturdays, if you're local to the area, the Tampa area, Saturdays, we've been doing door-to-door canvassing to try to combat HB1, because it's terrible, but a lot of people just think of it as like, oh, it's an anti-rioting bill. No, it also denies protesters bail.
And one other provision that I just remembered is if a municipality agrees to move funding from police departments, the bill will sanction them, and I can't remember what they'll lose, but they'll lose some type of funding that comes from the state that they basically disincentivizing defund the police. So I do believe if this bill were to pass and it eventually got challenged, it would be struck down by any sensible Supreme Court, even if it went all the way up to the SCOTUS. But you never know. And too many people would have to get harmed first for that to happen.
Exactly.
But at this point, I do think that we should go ahead and wrap up. This has been really amazing. We are hoping to do this on the last Sunday of each month. So we'll be sending out some more information. You can also join us as a member if you are able. Putting the link in the chat. We have tiers as low as $5 a month, up to $100 a month, whatever you can afford. We're transparent with our finances, so every month we post where our money is going. We haven't bought a yacht yet. I don't think it's on the plan, but we appreciate our members who are able to sustain. We know that's not everybody's place at this point. And because of our ethos, we don't have anything that is important knowledge locked behind our paywall. It's usually just kind of the silly, like extra stuff that we put behind the paywall. But if it's information about what's happening in the community, that will always remain accessible to you. Any last thoughts? All right, do we want to like do a quick like meditative exit here?
I think what would be dope, if folks consent, is maybe one word about how you're feeling before you leave. And I hope that this workshop provided you all some light at the beginning of your week, and we continue to grow with you all. So I'll model. It's been amazing spending time and holding space with you all. One word that I feel is enlightened, like bright. I feel bright. And whoever would like to jump in, feel free.
My word would be encouraged. Because, you know, having people present here to learn, and we're all learning together, it shows that, you know, there is the thirst for this type of knowledge. And I love the questions that you were posing, Bo, because they're so important and relevant. And it's these kinds of conversations that keep me encouraged to be like, yes, people are interested and wanting this stuff to happen. So that's my word.
And I want to elevate Bo. I see that frustrated, exhausted, but a little bit more impassioned. Hope, I think all of us get to that point. So I want to say the word I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling a little bit lighter than how I felt when I came on, in the sense that I just feel the weight of the world on me. And for now, I'm just a little lighter. And then Kit elevated, I want to elevate, Kit said blessed. And then I want to throw it to Angel.
Oh, y'all have used such great words to describe how I'm feeling better than I could. So Sadie, Angel's, and Kieran's language, I definitely feel enlightened, lightened, and encouraged. So thank you all for your work and doing this.
And thank you, Lizzie, feeling a little light and warm now and finding some new community. Emily, mind if I throw it to you?
Yeah, I feel so, what's the word? Well, I don't know the word. I'm just glad you're all here, you know? I'm glad that we came together to talk about restorative justice today, and we had such a great conversation, and I feel more informed, even though I technically presented. Like, I've learned a lot just by listening. So it's great to be around you all and hear your questions and your thoughts and just learn more.
Awesome. Well, with that, I feel like we should go ahead and I think everybody spoke, so we can go ahead and close the space. We'll reach out to you about the next workshop and any future events in between. Thank you all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Have a good day.
You
Bye,
as
Kit.
well.